Start there. Thank you very much. Opening karakia. So if you want to join with me, whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mai kina ki atu, kia mātura tara ki tai, he aki ana te atakura, he tio he auka, he hau te he Māori. Kia ora, and thank you all. Welcome everybody here that's in the room, plus those online. And I can't see the screen's not working, so I'll be looking for cues from behind me if anyone is wishing to speak. So we'll try and manage that. Firstly, apologies. We have a number of apologies. Mayor Janet Holborough, and she's online. Janet, you're online?
Yeah, I'm here.
Thank you very much. Mayor Tory Whānau is apology for absence. Mayor Campbell Barry and Kura Moya Ahu is also an apology. Would someone like to move those apologies be accepted? Thank you, Mayor Guppy. Seconder, please. Someone online. Thank you, Anita. Thank you, Mayor Baker. All in favour? Against? Motion's carried. Thank you. Declarations of any conflicts of interest. Are there any conflicts of interest that need to be declared? Nothing online? There being none, I move forward. Public participation, no notification of anyone to attend public forum. Thank you. Straight into business then. So confirmation of the minutes for the Civil Defence Emergency Management meeting held on 3rd of September 2024, taking it that they've all been read. Would someone like to move those minutes to a true and accurate record? Thank you, Mayor Guppy. And thank you, Janet. Mayor Janet. Are there any questions, comments at this point before I put the motion? Take it they are fine. All in favour? Against? Motion's carried. First item beyond the minutes, a risk and assurance update. Mark and Dan, if you'd care to take.
Kia ora, thank you. Kia ora koutou katoa. My name is Daniel Neely. I'm the Standing and Regional Manager on Secondment for the next 5 months over at Remo. Really nice to be here with y'all. And we really want to kind of open up this first presentation on risk insurance to open up with a bit of an exercise and kind of get everybody thinking and a little bit more, hopefully engaged. We don't want to just talk at you. We want to get you kind of thinking and participating in some of these conversations actively. So Mark is going to provide a high-level overview of what has been developed over the last 6 months with councils, wider partners around what we can do to really understand where we're at as a system, understanding both the risks and challenges and the capacity to solve those challenges. So Mark, I'll turn it over to you.
Beautiful, thanks Dan. So as Dan mentioned, my name is Mark Duncan. I work at the Wellington Region Emergency Management Office, and for around the last sort of 9 to 10 months we've just been looking at standing up a regional assurance function. So the purpose of this update is just to give you a bit of an overview of some of the assurance activities we've been carrying out across the region, and then we just wanted to present some really initial findings and insights and just facilitate a little bit of a conversation off the back of those insights we've generated. So if we're able to go to the next slide, please. So I guess one of the challenges I'd highlight early with this discussion is just the complexity of this risk space. I think probably most people are pretty familiar with looking at risk from an organisational perspective, but when we started unpacking the risk picture across what is a really diverse network of stakeholders with a whole lot of challenging scenarios, it gets quite complicated. So to try and focus the way that we're thinking about risk, we've framed it up across 3 broad scenarios that we're going to tackle. So I'm just going to step you through those scenarios which are across the top of the A3 page that supported this report. And the first one on the left is that most likely scenario. So a number of you will be familiar with a scenario like this. You've probably presided over them in the past. We're talking about things like flooding in Kapiti, perhaps Tohoro's cut off, or Rikirangi's a recent example. Plymouth floods in the Porirua area a few years ago now, but impacting a sort of suburb level, sort of 150 odd households is an example there. South Coast swells in the Wellington city area. Last time the region declared a state of emergency was to evacuate around 150 households on the south coast. Plenty of flooding in Hutt City, a little bit lighter in Upper Hutt. I'm told nothing bad really happens in Upper Hutt, which is good news for the constituents there. And then jumping over the hill, we've had Kaifara River landslides, an example of an event that's popped up a couple of times in the Wairarapa, and then more recently Cyclone Gabriel obviously impacted the northern part of the Wairarapa. So those are the sort of events we're talking about when we're thinking about risk in the most likely space. Fairly frequent, relatively low and constrained impact, if you keep those in your mind when we move forward to the activity. And then we step up in terms of scale and complexity, most likely plus. So that's where we've been drawing a lot of insights from the experiences that Auckland had through the Auckland floods. And we've looked closely at Hawke's Bay, particularly through Cyclone Gabriel, and thought about how that might impact our region and the risks and issues that we would face in a scenario like that. And then more recently, Charlie will provide an update later about what an alpine fault earthquake would look like for us in the region. We exercised that a few weeks ago. And although the shaking obviously centred down south, that's still likely to cause some pretty significant impacts and consequences for us in our region that we've got a deeper appreciation of off the back of that exercise. So that's more about broader scale of impact, more people with needs. I suppose lifeline outages is the other feature of those sorts of events. And then the really grim scenario, that most dangerous, less likely, but very catastrophic Hikurangi subduction zone earthquake, and really scarily, there's the tsunami associated with that. As kind of the event we're talking about most dangerous. So you might pick up, we're not talking much about Wellington earthquake. That's probably in between that most likely plus and most dangerous. Still a feature, but it has some different elements to it that we haven't really looked at. So we're using those three scenarios to then assess what the system can do and what it can't, which I'll step you through shortly. But from here, I think we'll just jump into the activity and gather some feedback from you about how you think the system might performance against some of these scenarios.
Right, thanks, Mark. So what we thought as a way to maybe start this conversation is developing a little bit of a thought exercise, brain engaging activity on where you think the system, and the system, when we talk about the system, we're talking about the official response, we're talking about that community response as well, where the system is to be able to solve the challenges associated with the three levels that we've kind of presented to you: most likely scenario, most likely plus, and a most dangerous catastrophic event. So in front of you, I believe Jess has passed out some little strips of paper. What we're going to ask you to do is take those pieces of paper and add what you think. We'll go through one by one. Add what you think the official response can meet the needs of communities within the first 7 days, what that community response will look like, and if there's any gaps, what is that gap of service, right? So we're really putting it around the life safety context at the end of 7 days. And there's a real, of course, you can go down a rabbit hole and look at this through 100 million different lenses. So it's more of just a big picture thought piece exercise, just to kind of think about what does it look like for the official response to meet those needs, the community response, right? Our range of communities, Mount Whenua, chiming in with all the amazing marae, sports groups, etc., community mercy hubs, and then what is the gap? So we're going to go through them one by one. Does that kind of make sense to everybody? Everybody's got a piece of paper with them? So we'll do it one by one, and then what we're going to do is we're going to share the findings of what we did with our emergency management collective, which is the council staff that work in emergency management. We'll share their findings as an aggregate. So I'm not going to ask people to share their individual pieces. Don't worry, I'm not going to put anybody on the spot, right? We'll share the aggregate, and then we'll share the aggregate of what we did 2 weeks ago at the KEG meeting, just to kind of share where everybody's at. They're kind of interesting findings, and it'd be fun for us as a future reference just to see where this kind of group sits in that thinking as well. So we'll go through it one by one if everybody understands what we're doing. Online, unfortunately, you don't have those pieces of paper. So what we're going to do is let you look at it from this point of view. You can just scribble those down on a piece of paper around you, and I'll give you a second. If you want to chime in and send us those to contribute to the aggregate, that'd be welcome. If not, that's okay too. And then we'll just have a little bit of korero afterwards around just kind of what you think of this exercise. So let's do through the first one. If you think back to those scenarios that Mark just kind of ran through, Plimerton, Hikurangi, South Coast swell event a few years ago, what percentage of needs are being met by the official system? What percentage of community needs are being met by the community themselves? And what is the gap in that service? Again, just at the end of 7 days, mainly from a kind of a life safety emergency welfare point of view. So things like recovery is out of context here, right? It's out of scope. Just at the end of 7 days. The other piece I probably just need to be reiterating is it needs to add up to 100%. Oh no, math. That's the first thing that comes to my mind too. So across that level 1, it's got to add up to 100%. Best guess, what do you think it's going to be?
So if we want to share our thoughts online, where should we send them to? To DEM services?
I will look if somebody wants to share their thoughts. What I would like to do, if it's all right, Mayor Halber, is have a conversation afterwards, or do you want to do it? What we're going to do is we're going to run through them all right now, 1, 2, 3, and then we'll have a kind of sharing of thoughts and ideas afterwards.
That's good.
Right on. Thank you. Let's do most likely plus. Let's kind of wrap this up. I know it's easy to let your mind go down that rabbit hole. We'll keep it pretty high level. You need another minute. But let's move on to most likely plus. So that's a Cyclone Gabriel style storm that hit your town head on. Right? Think about what you just would have seen in Spain a couple of weeks ago. That's a most likely plus scenario. Just to kind of think about recent types of things to put it fresh in your mind. What percentage of needs are being met by the official system? Think of all those, in that event you're gonna have loss of life in that type of event. You're gonna have some big emergency welfare needs. What percentage of community needs are being met by the community themselves? Community emergency hubs, Mirai activating. And what percentage of needs are not being met at the end of those 7 days? Life safety, emergency welfare. So that Cyclone Gabriel event hit your town. Yeah, it's not an exact, right? It's not exact. We'll do one more. Finally, most dangerous, which is Hikarangi with a tsunami, right? So that is a 9.1. That is the modeling that's come out. 9.1 4-minute long earthquake followed by a tsunami. 25% chance of that in the next 50 years. Those are not odds you want to take to Vegas, right? So what you remember seeing in 2011 in Japan, 2004 Sri Lanka, where I was doing international labor before immigrating to here, that's what we can experience and will experience here at some point. So putting that all in context, what percentage of needs are being met by the official system? Catastrophic event, right? You saw that picture, a boat sitting on top of a building. Catastrophic event. What is the official system doing? Being able to meet those needs at the end of 7 days. What percentage of community needs are being met by the community themselves while the official system is standing up? And what percentage of those needs are not being met? Life safety, emergency welfare at the end of 7 days. I'll just give everybody 1 minute. We'll have a little corridor. Is everybody about done? Let's open it up to general thoughts around the room. Anybody want to share general thoughts? Things that stood out to you, surprises, already thinking through this as a thought exercise? Open up to anybody that wants to speak. Yeah.
I'll start, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a difficult question to answer. And I'll start with the most dangerous, if that's all right.
Yeah.
Because that's something that my small community in Paikakariki, though it wasn't one of those events, it was a similar thing that we'd experience on a district-wide scale if one of those events happened, because we'd be on our own. And the example I'm thinking of, which was not a most dangerous one, but was a similar scenario in terms of being isolated, was the 2003 floods in Paikakariki, where nobody could get in or out. And in that case, there was no official response. So I've put 5% for official response on that one. And if you go, and then I've kind of doubled it for each one. So most likely 10%, and the most likely plus 10%, and then most likely 20%. Because just because of our isolation, and also because each community within our district is isolated. So we rely heavily on that second column, the community response. And that's the message that we're getting, and that's what we're trying to prepare for. So that was my kind of approach. So my first column kind of had 20, 10, 5, kind of halving as you go down, and then kind of 80, 60, 40 for the community response. And then I had, ideally, we wouldn't have anybody whose needs weren't provided within the first 7 days for most likely, but most likely plus, I reckon, about a third of people, so 30%. And then most dangerous, I think over half of people won't be able to access help within the first 7 days. So I've put 55 for that, which is quite a gloomy way to look at things, but that's my first guess, my first kind of stab. That's what I was thinking.
Right on. Thank you for sharing that. And that's the intriguing part of this, right? Is everybody, I'm sure, around the room has somewhat similar numbers, maybe quite some different numbers, and that's part of the reason we're doing this exercise is to really start to shape what is our shared understanding, what is kind of the bell curve, because we actually don't have a shared understanding of risk and the risk we face and the capacity to solve those risks, and we actually don't have a shared kind of vision of what kind of model we want to build for the future. Does anybody else want to share thoughts? Anything that jumps out before I do the big reveal of what had gone before us? Cal?
So similar to what me and Janet was saying, with the most dangerous, I put 5. I think it's the same as what me and Janet put. The most likely plus this percentage of needs provided by official response. I put 15, and that's maybe I'm being a little bit generous. And for most likely, I put 30%. I guess it does depend on what we mean by each of those. For my values for the community, I was less generous. I think the community will be there, but I think there's resources required and training. I think I'm not sure how useful a marae will be if the whare is red stickered and there's no power.
Yeah. Right on. Thank you. And that there's dimensions to that, right? Is people will be coming together. Is it at the marae? If the marae isn't serviceable, how else might people be coming together to look after their friends and whānau, right? Yeah, totally. Any other closing thoughts before I do the big reveal?
Well, I'm a bit more hopeful. I actually think in the first scenario, most likely, I don't think needs not provided. I don't think will be covered. It'll be 0%. I don't have an issue. I think that between the official response and community response, 60-40, will cover, and that it's not quite as enthusiastic as we get down, but I think the most dangerous, I'd say that about 50% for needs not provided after 7 days, and a 30-20 cut in the official response to community response.
Okay. All right. Well, let's do the big showcase reveal and see what emergency managers within your councils. We ran this exercise before. We did it with KEG, and then we ran it with KEG. Let's see what we got. Whoops, I'm the one with the clicker button. So most likely, 59 and 52% in collective and KEG, 26, 34, 15, 14. We'll share these with everybody so you don't have to write them down. We'll have a little code after this. Most likely plus 35, 38, 40, 30, 25, 32. and for that big horrific event on par with the official 3522 and 1563. Any thoughts, reflections now, surprises? Similar, dissimilar to kind of what you're generally thinking?
Yeah. But
Mayor Mark?
yes, I'm not unhappy with that in terms of being close to what people are thinking. I guess the question I have is the difference between rural and metropolitan. How would that look? Because, you know, I know from the experience in Christchurch that the people's response inside of the city was somewhat different to those who were further out on the fringes of the city or in more rural areas, and the same at Kaikoura.
Yeah.
You know, people. Classic example from my son, who was a policeman on the ground at the time, getting called to a house and lambasted because the house didn't have a portaloo provided at the gate. He took them to the shed, pulled a shovel out, told them to go and dig a hole, and that sort of thing for other people is just a norm, but for some people who've always lived in metropolitan areas, it wasn't a thinker. Getting a 10 litre or 20 litre pot of paint or a bucket and cutting a hole in it and putting it above the hole was pretty basic and normal and sensible to some people. To other people, it wasn't. So the level of community response, I'd just be interested in what the research looks like as to how communities, metropolitan, urban-centric communities perform in that space as opposed to more rural, provincial.
Yeah, and that might be a conversation to have at a future point, because we're real big on evidence base and the way that we built our community models. There's a huge evidence base that people, you know, we evolved as Homo sapiens to look after each other, right? And so that happens in times of day to day and emergency events. But I'm curious what else we've got here. South Y, Melissa.
Thanks. Yeah, I'll concur with Ron. My needs not met estimates are fairly well in line with what you've got here, but needs met by the community response for South Y, I think, would be considerably higher, like maybe 10 or 15% higher than what you've got there, just because experience tells us that there is no one riding in on a white horse to save us. We are that bit further away from the metropolitan areas, and we are aware that an official response in terms of kind of any level of cavalry coming to save us will take considerable time. In the first instance, we will need to be able to look after ourselves with a community response.
Yeah, music to my ears. Music to my ears.
I'll just add to that, and it's not just about cultural behaviour. It's also about resources. If I take Flat Point as the example, totally cut off, totally isolated, Gabriel, not such a problem for them because they naturally have generators, they naturally have John Deere tractors, they naturally have bulldozers and big trailers and tractors that can haul it around. Their ability to look after themselves is considerably different because they are better resourced, better placed.
So this is just a great thought-provoking exercise, which is why we wanted to raise it, right? We have really deliberately over the last decade tried to build our system to think not just about the official response, but that community response as well. And where we're really going with this exercise is trying to start to establish a baseline through this risk assurance piece of work that Mark is leading to help us understand where we're at as a system, where do we want to go, what kind of foundation do we want to build for the future system of emergency management in the Wellington region. So, Mark, do you want to just walk us through these last steps?
Well, thanks, Dan. So yeah, it's interesting. My sort of reflection off the back of this activity and discussion, I guess, is how these results would resonate with the community, right? And we've seen through recent events, particularly in Auckland floods, as an example. If you can go to the next slide, please, Dan. There was intense political pressure and community pressure that night for the official response to spring into action, and the demand on that system was obviously exceeded capacity. They were trying to open something like 19 or 20 essentially welfare centres or evacuation centres reactively on that Friday night, and there was not that official capacity to do so, and it came across as a bit of a surprise, I guess, to seem like political level and the community, right? So that actually was really, I thought, quite a realistic assessment that everyone's pulled together, and it lines up with where the insights and the evidence has landed for us. So this is a bit of a holding slide, really. I'm talking to the A3 that supported this presentation, and we're just going to step through that kind of initial insights into where the system's at. So for that most likely scenario, we've had them quite frequently in our region, and we've got a lot of really strong underlying systems and features built into our emergency management system that put us in a good position when those events popped up. And a couple of highlights is probably the mutual support that councils and partner agencies provide to each other across the region. So where we've seen one area impacted, on every single occasion, other councils have provided staff and resources to that council that's sort of in the firing line to help each other out, and that's really put us in a good place for those most likely events. So the general appreciation is actually we can probably deliver a pretty good level of service and support to the community in those most likely events, which is great. Then we move up into the second tier, which is that most likely plus, which is what this sort of slide's about. So there's a little bit of a reset into what we used to think in terms of our potential ability to perform under that sort of scenario historically, and we've drawn some really good insights from the Auckland flood reviews and Cyclone Gabriel Hawke's Bay event. And we've done capability assessments with each of the councils, and as a result of that, it really has indicated that we're probably not quite going to be able to deliver on all those potential needs in those scenarios, which is exactly what everyone sort of indicated through the activity we've just done. So that then begs the question of where to head from here, and how do we influence the official system to provide more support, or do we invest in the community and try and lift that capacity that way? And that will lead into the strategy discussion shortly that Dan and Jess will pick up on. But it's an important point, I suppose, just for us all to recognise that the system is at a basic level. There are some gaps and there are some risks in a number of key areas that are set out in the A3. Some of them are not new, they've been around for a while, and that's where we just probably need to take a longer term view and look strategically at how we can start looking at some of those risks and gaps, which is what Dan will touch on shortly.
Just one question on that. How much of an issue is churn, if you like, within the community sector in particular? So you invest in year one, but in year three, none of the people who were there in year one are there anymore, or have moved on to other things. How much is that an issue compared to the official response size in terms of, I suppose, bang for dollar?
Very good question. I can address part of it, and then I might hand to Dan for the community lens, because I'm across the official side. Is we do have major challenges with attrition even through council workforce. So we went through periods where we're sort of getting 30 or 40% attrition. So we would invest in training these staff up to sort of the best level we could, and we would lose quite a few staff sort of on an biannual basis. So it does have a pretty big impact. Even now, when we had an exercise a few weeks ago, around 30 or 40% of the staff, it was their first ever exercise. So we're getting people with some basic levels of training, and then they go into a really complex multi-agency stretch scenario with very little experience. So it is a major challenge in the system. I guess the underlying mitigations is that we use SIMS, so that provides interoperability across the country, and we work as closely as we can with other groups. So if we lose staff, sometimes we receive staff from other councils and other groups. We've got like-for-like processes that can help, but it is one of the biggest challenges that we've got. A small final point on that, I guess, is what we've seen too. We see a lot of CDM staff that go through these really tough events like this, and they get burnt out and we lose them. And that's a massive loss of that institutional knowledge and experience, which is another problem with our sector, is looking after staff that do go through these big events so we can retain them. But I don't know if Dan can add to the community side of the house.
Sure. Thanks. So Ron talked about what kind of evidence-based do we draw upon, and over the last decade, we've really looked at what does the evidence base say around community response, and we have really built our model on the pretty strong foundation that everyone in society is an emergency manager, and we see that every day, right? We all manage emergencies. In an event, our societies don't just become kind of helpless people, just like you're talking about. Across the board, people stand up and start doing stuff. The biggest challenge is not so much capability of people, but a place for them to self-organize their local response. And that's how the whole community emergency hub model has been built. There's one in every suburb for people to start to come together and self-organize. And there's a little bit of a framework to give them to be able to do that more efficiently, more effectively. And that model has been so successful that is being rolled out across New Zealand and even internationally. So we have countries adopting that, Australia, the States, Canada, increasingly are adopting that model because there's an acknowledgement that people come together and they just need a place to start self-organizing, and then we have a line of sight to that. So if that sounds like something, maybe we can do a short kind of interactive activity along that topic in the future. Hope that answered your question.
So that covers off the most likely plus sort of where we sit. It's just a couple of the key risks, I suppose, I'd highlight with most likely plus are things like being able to evacuate the Hutt Valley. If we're looking at a stop bank breach, that represents a really significant challenge that there's not really any robust, viable plans for. So that's probably one area of concern. That's probably the main one for this one, yeah, if we jump to the next one, Dan. So then the third column, this is that most dangerous event. So less likely, although scarily, some quite high probabilities getting forecasted by scientists around the probability of a Hikurangi event. Hard to conceptualise this sort of scenario, 4 minutes of severe shaking and then a tsunami arriving within minutes off the coast. And this is where we know that there will be very little to minimum chance of an official response swinging into action for quite some time. And what's distinct about this scenario versus a Wellington earthquake is it will obviously impact a really wide area part of New Zealand. So the ability for other groups to come in and support us like they would in a Wellington earthquake is probably less likely in a Hikurangi event because everybody will have impacts in their own patches. So this really speaks to that community resilience and community response model. There's a couple of key metrics that we're looking closely at around making sure the community know what to do and can take action in that life safety space. And this is a classic example of really wanting to think about, are we comfortable that around 50% of people know what to do in a tsunami, or should we be setting a higher target and putting more effort into trying to lift that level of understanding and action so people aren't dependent on the text alerts, which is the statistic on the right, where there's sometimes an increasing tendency to wait for the official response to tell people to do something poses risk in this particular scenario. So there's quite a few metrics in here in the community space. Levels of water storage is another probably metric that matters. People's understanding of community emergency hubs, who will open them from an expectation perspective, will paint a picture, I guess, about a basic level of community resilience in a number of areas and some uncertainty about exactly what that capacity looks like in an event like this, where we know the official response is just not going to be equipped to deal with this in the first 7 days. So broadly, the answer from a risk perspective is that the system's probably not going to be able to deliver the response some people might be expecting in a scenario like this as it stands today. That's the broad summary of the A3, and I guess really interested to see if broad agreement with that. If anyone's got any questions or alternate views, really welcome that.
Any questions online? Sorry. Anita? Mara?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. We all know something's coming and that's fine, and we all tell people to be prepared, but probably 50% of my community cannot store food. They don't have the capacity to feed themselves for a week at the moment with things as they are. How on earth are we going to cope when the big one does, or even a medium-sized one? Because we've got so many people in the community who cannot store food or have the ability to even spend money on extra food. Have we even thought about that?
Kia ora, Mayor Baker, Daniel here. Yeah, absolutely. We've thought about that, and that's why we're not actually big on trying to push household food storage, because we know people are dealing with emergencies every day in that sense. We talk about that around general household preparedness, but what we've really looked at is how do we build this system, and that's where the hubs are really important, because people will come together, self-organize. If we can enable that, where people will be able to look after each other, looking collective resources. That's how we really try to build that model, and the evidence base is really strong that it supports that approach. It's kind of we definitely want to promote people to have all their household plans in place, and we do, but we certainly recognize that they're huge members of society, that we can't ask them to plan for an abstract future event when they're dealing with real emergencies every day. And so how do we build that system? That's kind of very much the foundation of the hub model. What I'm hearing is maybe that's a future conversation topic to really unpack some of the nuance in our planning there.
Well, the Marae are doing it very well, but and I know we're just opened a Pacific one in the east, but if anyone knows and there's food stored there, it gets burgled. So I think it'll be an interesting one, because in COVID, yeah, we all know what happened. So
yeah,
not much I can say there probably.
I can just add a small point to that question too. From an official response perspective, I suppose that was an area that came out really low from a capability assessment perspective as emergency supply chain arrangements. It's a really complex area to unpack with all the vulnerabilities across our system between a transport network being down. If you've got no electricity, we saw payment services being out in Hawke's Bay, so how do people pay for the food? You obviously need electricity to run refrigeration and support supermarkets if you want to get them standing up. So it's another good example of a really multifaceted area of risk that's going to take some pretty deep thought and I guess some real focus to try and develop some contingency plans to support some mitigations in that space. And it is an area of risk for the region at the moment, I think, for sure.
Any other questions online or others in the room? So then I'll ask a question. Look, when you start getting to scenarios like most dangerous, that's the the good, the bad, and that is the ugly. And we're admitting figures of 15% of needs met by the official response within the 7 days, and we're saying that's a potential fail. At that level, though, you're talking a national response. You're not talking just this organisation. So I guess my question is, in terms of supply chain and transportation, what are you thinking? How will that 15% figure be addressed at the national level? What does that look like, and what do you need? Are we doing stock takes to ensure that the gaps that exist at the national level have been identified? Because 15% is pretty damn low, and if all of the infrastructure around Wellington, like State Highway 2, State Highway 1, the streets are blocked through buildings that are brought down, you've got half of all of Petone gone, most of Hutt South or Lower Hutt's gone. You're not going to be able to, people aren't going to be able to say, look after themselves in the first 3 to 4 days in those scenarios. So the question becomes, what's coming down at us and where are the gaps in that? Who's thinking of that?
It's a fantastic question that I can't obviously fully answer. I think that the challenges with that scenario is recognised at the national level, and NEMA do have a planning team that are exploring everything that you just highlighted, I suppose, in terms of challenges with the system. But I couldn't give you a full and comprehensive answer to that particular question. It's a recognised gap at the national level, and we could give you some more updates, but I don't know if Dan's got anything to add to that one.
Because some of us might say that if the airport's gone, we used to have a ship that could survey the seabed and tell you if the channel has been raised, and you can't now get ships of a certain size in. If the wharf is gone, where's the next airhead? Well, some of us in the Wairarapa would probably say it's Hood. But who's having that conversation about informing the resourcing of Hood Aerodrome to make it the backup to Wellington? Or are we just going to sit over in the Wairarapa and say, we're okay, mate, you guys look after yourselves?
So there's elements of that as built into the Wellington Region Earthquake Plan in terms of those contingencies and how that supply chain might work. I think probably the area that's most relevant to this discussion would be the WELD program business case that looked at a whole lot of different lifeline investment initiatives that would reduce some of our outages. So a good example is State Highway 58, getting from Transmission Gully through to the Hutt Valley is an example of one of the projects in that case that would then unlock road to help with the resupply. So there's examples of work and mitigations and things that have been identified to support the sort of outcome that you're driving towards. But I guess the purpose of this update is to flag that there's a lot of risk there at the moment, and there needs to be a lot more work done by people with a different sort of lens than what I'm bringing to the discussion to take that thinking forward.
And I would add to that, I think that's a really nice segue into the next conversation when we get there around the strategy we want to build for the future, to be really deliberate about what kind of system we have or what kind of system we want to build. To make sure that we're communicating that and that we're getting that strategic direction from you.
Can I just say, if you're waiting for 58, it's not completed for another 3 years. So what happens if something happens in between? It's a piece of crap road now. You don't have to answer that. I'm just being sarky.
I guess the ask back would be, political influence potentially, like State Highway 58 we know was updated from a safety perspective, but we don't believe much was spent on seismic strengthening. So while it's a safer road, some of the key known vulnerabilities, probably due to funding, have not been addressed, and therefore not reduced the potential outage in some key scenarios. And that one road will provide a real challenge for the Hutt Valley. So I guess it's an opportunity to think politically about how to influence that. The other road that's part of the program business case is the I think it's Petone to Granada, which may or may not be going forward. You might have better insights than me, but those sorts of initiatives where we can be transparent with you about things that would make a difference to the response, and we can do anything politically to support initiatives like that would be worthwhile considering, I suppose. But I agree with you on that road, Mayor Baker.
It's nowhere near completed, and yeah, let's just not go there. Move on.
Thank you.
So I suppose just to wrap up then, this was obviously just an initial indicative sort of update of where things have progressed. The plan for assurance going forward is really good news. NEMA has actually just appointed a Deputy Chief Executive Assurance, which was one of the main reasons we stood up this function, was to partner with NEMA, and then we can start unpacking some of the questions that were asked around what the national system's thinking about and doing in those catastrophic scenarios. So I'm really looking forward to that role coming online in the new year. And basically the intent is to create more of an annual cycle of doing a deeper dive into what the system can do and what it can't. And we want to use those insights just to inform that investment in the system so that we are trying to mitigate these risks and use the resources we've got that are available to the best effect. So the intent is every year we're doing an annual assessment at council level to provide a real local granular assessment about where the councils are at. And the hope and aspiration is to start looking at some of those partner agencies that are more central government focused, but have a real big role in our region when we get into those really major events, just to see how they might perform, the likes of MSD, as an example, in the welfare space. So that's what we want to track over the next sort of 6 to 12 months. Thank you very much.
So Dan, if I might, what's the summary? I mean, looking at most likely plus most dangerous, how are we sitting in terms of right now? I mean, clearly most dangerous is a problem, and that's something that's got to be addressed at the national level. And I guess we all need to understand how.
That's it. So
what's been identified and what's going to be addressed and how that's going to be addressed at the national level. But in the terms of the stuff that we're pretty confident, we're looking at 59, 52%, 35s, 38s in those spaces. How are we looking? What should we be thinking about?
So thank you. So I think this is a good segue into the next conversation around the strategy that we develop and being really deliberate about the system that we build. This is a bit of a gut check on where this sits across these three areas. And maybe I can just talk a little bit about that if we want to move to
the next. Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Oh. All right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do we?
Wellington Water. Sorry.
Wellington Water. Sorry.
No,
you up next?
No, give me. Sorry, say that again.
We'll
just lost track of it.
We'll close this one out with recommendations.
There are no
Sorry.
recommendations on this. No, it's just a discussion.
Just discussion point. So this is really just seeding the future conversation around where we're going to be going with the risk update.
Right. Okay. So then that's an information paper. We're moving to the next information paper. It's useful discussion and a useful exercise, but I think it leaves more questions than answers, to be honest. Item 6, Wellington Water update. Charles.
So I'm going to take off now. We're not Wellington Water, so and there might be things later, but I've got another briefing I'd like to go to. So thank you for that. That was a really great exercise in real food.
It's always an option, Mayor Hildra.
Sorry, what was that?
It's always an option. You can join Wellington Water.
No, I'm aware of that. Thank you very much. Appreciate the offer.
Thank you, Janet. Thank you very much. Charles.
Kia ora, thank you for the opportunity to talk to you about the risk of an acute water shortage over the summer period. I just acknowledge that this is for the metropolitan network and that some of the other councils represented here aren't part of that network. My aim is to give you an overarching assurance of the risk that we're facing this summer, assurance of how we know that risk is the risk, and provide an indication out a little bit into the future about what the risks are facing the region. I'll just draw attention to the slide in the pack, which has the, it's called the Acute Water Supply and Demand Update. It's the one with the percentages on it. I forgot to bring it up. These are the percentages. At the end of October, we ran our model. Our model is NIWA, and it's all been independently verified. So the chances of risk this summer are 40% at level 2, level 3, 14, and level 4 is 4%. We can contrast that to last year, where there was a 100% chance of a level 2 risk, 70% chance of level 3, and a 33% chance of level 4. And I think it's really important there to acknowledge the resources the councils, our owners, have made available to Wellington Water over the last year, and hopefully they can see that those resources were well utilised and the risks have been come down and meet Taumata Arawai's expectations at the head of the council and Wellington Water and the region to reduce the risk of an acute water shortage to something that was acceptable. And so that's the first assurance, is that we have achieved that. The Taumata Arawai is satisfied with the actions that we've done, and the risks are within the tolerance of the regulator and hopefully of our owner councils. There's a couple of things in the percentages. That's our first cut when we run the model for the first time. We're running the model again now because NIWA provides us more and more data, and as we move through the year, obviously we get a greater understanding of what exactly is happening in the summer. I think every indication is that the percentages might climb a little bit just because it's a little bit drier than we thought, but nothing substantive is going to change. And also there's Greater Wellington Regional Council's Timarua water treatment plant upgrade, the DAF, is coming online and will be online before. I'm not the project manager, so I should be careful about now. Will be on before the peak of the risk. It's well on track. So that introduces an increased ability to access the lakes, which therefore gives us more headroom, which will substantially decrease the risk. So we can give you really good assurance that while the numbers may creep a little bit, just as we head towards the December, they'll be reined right back in again. In fact, they'll drop considerably again. I think the catches that we've been applying best practice of the industry when we hit the risk. The best practice of the industry when you face water loss of this magnitude is to fix leaks. Just find and fix leaks and improve your data. And we've been doing that, and that is why it's industry best practice, because it achieves a short-term result. But I think all the councils have heard this and understand it really well, that patching leaks is, we can keep this up, but it's a sustained investment now. We have to keep this low. We just have to keep patching until renewals come through and replace the aged pipes. And that, as we know, is that everyone knows that the rate of renewals is not where it needs to be. What I would highlight is just how fast it can bounce back. Updated from this is that both we're having conversation with Upper Hutt and Porirua about the budgeting. So it's so I'll just say it's not fair to say that where the line is there that says it's unbudgeted from this point. There's a slide there. But what we do know from doing our model when we were concerned about that is that if we just use Upper Hutt as an example, if you had about 40 leaks, if you did nothing from now to the end of the financial year, that would get up to about 400. So the leakage will return really, really quickly if we don't keep band-aiding the network. And so that's a real conundrum for the region going forward. We've got to keep investing in the OPEX to keep the leaks down, but we also at the same time have that requirement to go through and replace the pipes. So we'll be talking, that'll be reflected in the advice and everything that we're giving you around the plan, but that's a good thing to think about in the medium. And in the longer term, in the short term, this was a demand problem. There was too much water loss. and Wellingtonians use quite a bit of water anyway. But we can change that through kind of interventions, a bit of resource. We can change that, turn that around. The strategic problem that the region faces into the future is a supply problem. With the Whaitoa requirements to reduce our draw on supply, we need to hold and store more of the water to keep us going over the winter. So that's a supply problem, and there's good plans in place coming through for the for additional storage capacity, new lakes. But it's also really important that we drive down. The cheapest water that we've got is the water that we're putting into the ground at the moment through the water loss. So we need the meters to bring the water loss down, to buy us time to make really well-informed decisions about the lakes, which are huge investments. But we need to do that in a timely fashion, because if that strategic risk manifests, there's nothing. Resources won't help. They can't make water. So that's out into the future. What I'm here for today is just to give you assurance that this summer there is a negligible chance of an acute water shortage that would cause an emergency that would require the intervention of a group like this. But I'm happy to answer any questions on the paper or anything else.
Any questions online? Any questions in the room? None said.
Kia ora, thank you.
There being no questions, we'll move on to item 7, which has a decision requirement. Wellington Regional Civil Defence Emergency Management Strategy Update. Dan.
Thank you, Mayor. So just kind of flowing on from that last conversation around where we're at with our risks, we just want to really kind of lay the foundation for where we want to go as a region in developing a longer term strategy. So the current state of play is that we have a CDM group plan, technically involving all members of what's called the CDM group, that lasts for 5 years. That group plan is designed, and the content is really based on the legislative requirements set out by NEMA, and it really is a mix of kind of strategic and operational planning. Our group plan, current one, was published in 2019, and with a 5-year life cycle, it's basically 2 years out of date, coming in 2025. So there's a few reasons for that, which have all been approved in past meetings like this. But as it stands, we don't really have a long-term strategy for the region to deal with the challenges of the future, and even the nuance of different things about how the system works, where it stands, how we navigate that. Some of the points that even Mayor Baker was just touching on. So regardless, the group plan is one that sits, as you can see in this slide, amongst a wider planning environment. It involves a range of other plans and strategies, such as the National Disaster Resilience Strategy, which was developed in 2019 at the same time, long-term plans by council, partner agency plans. The problem for us right now is we don't have anything that actually really guides us for the long term like council. So those challenges we face that are kind of abstract and getting bigger and meaner and faster, like climate change, we need to really think through how we start to navigate in the future. So I'll just turn it over to Jess if you want to talk about some of where we're going to be going with that specifically.
Yeah, so as Dan said, just to clarify, the CDM group plan that Dan was mentioning, the little 5-year snapshot, is the document that this joint committee is responsible for and owns and drives. So I think that's a really important point to note. That is your document that you steward across our entire region, across all of our partners, to make sure that we can deliver civil defence to our communities. Okay, so hopefully you all have very good knowledge of that plan. If not, we can arrange one to be sent. But that is what drives our entire CDM group, and you are the people who are responsible for that. So, but the problem with that is, as Dan said, it has a operational arm and a strategy, but all kind of smushed in together, and it doesn't really give a overarching view about where we want to go and what we want our system to look like. And that's the things that you were talking about, Mia, is what do we want our system to look like, and how are we going to do these things, and what is acceptable, and what does it look like? Because we all know we're working in confines of, we can't make it 100% of everything all the time. So it's having those conversations where we all collectively look at where we want to go, what we want the system to look like, and then how do we build that over the 10, 15 years. And the key point is that it's about the collective system. It's not even just about councils in this room. It is about the wider system. And you mentioned, national support, and that's a really valid point. But we can't always guarantee that that's going to be there. They are a small group of people like us too, who don't have a huge amount of resources and do the best they can. But if it's a national-wide event too, like the Hikurangi Subduction Zone, we can't expect that level of support that we might be hoping is going to come and provide it. So we need to make sure we are aware of that and making sure that we are building our own plan that we know that we can implement in such events. So essentially, we want to create an overarching strategy, as we said, and then just kind of use the group plan to implement it in chunks so that we can then use this joint committee to drive those chunks of implementation in 5 years. And it's just about creating an overarching strategy so that everybody knows where they fit in it and what their role is and what they do with it. And so that when we're planning LTPs, for example, for councils or emergency services are doing their strategies, that giving effect to that clear direction about where we want to go, and then for making sure that we're all aligned, which is the critical thing, alignment and North Star direction.
Mayor Baker?
Sorry, question. We already have direction, a plan from previously. Why do we have to spend a lot more money changing everything? We've already got things and we all work together. We've been asked for more money going forward, and I just wonder where it all goes. We don't see much of it on the ground, or our residents don't get much out of it. We see whetū once in a blue moon, and I feel like we actually don't see it in the community, and we spend a lot of money on plans and stuff that really, to me, doesn't actually help. So I guess I'd probably like a reply to that. I'm not being rude towards you. It's just like, what are we getting? Baseline.
That's a great question. And I would answer it to say that some of the reasons why we might not have made the demonstrated progress that we might be thinking we want to is because we haven't had an aligned North Star that requires a variety of agencies to participate and be aligned with us. As you know, we're a small, if you're speaking about Remo and the contribution to Remo, we're only a small group of people, and we try and maximise our impacts that we can across a variety of areas. But we do need help, and we do need people to be in alignment with us to then get that collective impact. What we're talking about with the strategy is the higher level version, so that we all know where we want to go and what we want to do. And that exact point that you're talking about how it might not be on the ground, or you might not be getting this for these people, those are the things we want to include in that strategy so that we are clearly articulating it and making sure we're all working towards it together. Because at the moment it feels a little bit piecemeal and people have different thoughts on different things. Our strength in CDM, because it is so, frankly, resource poor, has to be the collective impact and the integration and alignment of everybody working towards the same goal. That's what the
So would you not then pick one up that's already done, like Gisborne, who's been through it and done everything else, and then reuse it? Just tweak it to make it our regions?
We, of course, will look at a plethora of different strategies that are across nationwide. There aren't actually that many that are 10-year strategies about where CDM wants to go. Gisborne's obviously a different community environment to what we have in Wellington. We do have some very specific things that we need to address. And we will look across it, and we will work across, and we'll learn lessons from that. Most are looking at a group plan, though, is what they're looking at doing their strategies, and we want to acknowledge that the current system of the group plan is not providing enough of a steer longer term to get the tangible outcomes that we want.
Any other questions? Any other questions online? Any final points to make? I know we'll put up on the screen the resolutions.
Mayor Mark, I'll just maybe close with these final bits here. So we're working with Ampatillo to support the development of this strategy. So the opener today, just as basically kind of seeding those risks and kind of getting a shared understanding of those risks, will open the door for us to really start to prioritize how we want to work together across the region, both for the region and for your local councils, and then maybe starting bringing that alignment into effect, right? That's kind of the broader themes of where we want to go with this. And I'm starting that as a bit of a remote tour, meeting with all the CEs and leaders in the next couple month or so. I'm trying to get out. I've just been stepped into this role, so I want to get out and meet with everybody. And that includes all of you as mayors as well. And then really starting to develop the scope and timeline, which is something I want to be able to come back to our next joint committee meeting and give you a more robust picture of where this is going to go and what kind of feedback we're getting. So I'll close with that. Thank you.
So if I might ask any comments from CEs at this point? Thank you, Nigel.
Thanks, Mayor Mark. Thanks for the opportunity to comment. Yeah, we've had to run through this with our KEG meeting, obviously. From certainly my perspective, I think I speak for the behalf of the Cs. I think a 10-year plan, a lot of what the conversation has been, even a meeting like this today, is about the longevity of the system and actually how we integrate, particularly, I think, with that national system, which is constantly changing and evolving, and with the current government, it's going to go through further change. And I think the connection we need to have at a regional level and a local level, which is where the majority of the response will come from, does need to be better aligned and more strategically integrated with the national system. So I think a 10-year strategy provides a much better opportunity for that level of engagement and planning than we currently have under the 5-year strategy, so with the CDM plan. So yeah, I certainly understand Mayor Baker. It can be seen as yet another kind of piece of planning, which local government's fantastic at, but I think the opportunity to integrate more thoroughly and really look at how we get into that response space, in particular supported by central government, that's the real opportunity that I think we can utilise with a 10-year strategy. And plus, we work on 3-year electoral cycles and CE cycles and things like that, and that is too short to be dealing with the major issues that we're talking about in a hui like this. So, yeah, I think I support it. Yeah, thanks for the opportunity.
So could I ask, and this is looking for advice from CEs again, we know that we're good at planning in local government because we're required to plan, and according to the legislation we have a 10-year planning, a 10-year long-term plan, but it's reviewed every 3 years, and then it's reviewed annually when each council produces its annual plan. And we all know from experience that the 10-year plan that started out in 2021 is not the same 10-year plan today, post the 3-year review. Everybody's looking for surety and security around funding streams so that they can plan and work ahead. But we have these review points that tend to interdict that. And then on top of that, there are those councils, and I've seen it happening this triennium, who partway through a triennium decide that they're not going to fund something anymore and they're going to trim it. So we can, with all good intent, and I support this because it's baseline, it's a smart thing to do, but there's some tripwires along the way, which, all the best intentions in the world you can't avoid. So are we still comfortable knowing that? How do we handle that 3-year review period? What's crystal ball it for a bit of reality check for me, please? Chances are the people who are still going to be there after 3 years will be CEs.
Kia ora. Thank you, Your Worship. The current agreement has been extended to the 28th of February next year, so the CEs have agreed to extend that, and particularly in the Wairarapa. That's because there's a review currently underway, so there hadn't been any longer term commitments beyond that extension, and I think that we were waiting for that review to be completed. And certainly there was conversations about a 10-year agreement, but aligning it with the long-term planning cycle within councils, because that's the way we can assure funding, and I think that makes a great deal of sense.
Sorry, I got something in my throat. I just want to add that the 10-year agreement and that is related specifically to Remo, and so that's the service agreement that Remo does deliver on behalf of councils. We just want to be clear that this strategy is broader than that, because as we just said before, Remo is 30 staff. For us to actually make meaningful change, we need to align with a much broader group of people, which is what this group, the Joint Committee, represents, is all agencies who are part of civil defence. So whilst the 10-year agreement is part of it, and absolutely it will drive and it will determine what councils want Remo to deliver on their behalf. It is definitely much bigger than that. And this strategy would probably be more likely to define, in terms of councils and Remo, just our part within that piece, not the whole piece, if that makes sense. So yeah, it's much broader, much more alignment, many more agencies, community, huge part, the strategy.
No, thank you, Jess. Any further questions, comments online or from anyone before we move to the resolutions? Take silence as golden. Okay, so if we could move to the recommendations then, 1 and 2. Everyone comfortable take both those as one? Agrees that move to 10-year planning strategy to align the local authorities' long-term planning. Agrees the development of overarching regional emergency management strategy based on local authorities' long-term planning. Someone to move, please. I'll move.
Yep.
Anita, second. And thank you. All in favour?
Aye.
Those both 1 and 2 are carried. And moving 3 and 4 together, noting as written. Anita, or someone wrote? Melissa, I saw.
It's fine.
So you hang up, Melissa, and seconded Anita. Oh, sorry, Wayne.
Yep.
Happy as seconder. All in favour? Against? Motion is carried. Thank you. Thank you very much. Moving to exercise. Rū Whenua Arohi summary item 8. Dan.
Thank you. So a few weeks ago, we ran a regional exercise that was probably the biggest I've seen my time in emergency management, which is fantastic to see a lot of people participating across all of the council teams and really using that as a great learning activity. Charlie, do you want to walk us through some of what you saw, the key takeaways, what went well, and areas for improvement, please?
Sure. Kia ora koutou, ko Charlie Tokaringawa from the Primary Group Controller in Remo. So the exercise was the culmination of a series of multi-agency planning work that involved over 400 staff across the region and the activation of all of the CDEM-led coordination centres. So that was all 6 local EOCs and then the regional emergency coordination centre. And it was exercising the response at 24 hours after an alpine fault earthquake. So that middle most likely plus scenario that Mark described earlier in the risk and assurance activity, with the context that a lot of the rest of the resources available within New Zealand would have been focused on the response into the South Island, and Wellington region would have been largely isolated in that initial response whilst the impact across the rest of the country was undertaken. So we've got a series of pictures that will just step you through the activity within the region and highlight some of the fantastic work by council staff, emergency services and partner agencies. So I think if we start with Kapiti EOC, on all of these slides, as an emergency manager over 2.5 decades, I look for the look and feel within a coordination centre when I go in there, and you'll pick up from these photos that there is a sense of purpose within the rooms. That was really evident for the evaluators that we had within each exercise location, but staff wearing the coloured vests that relate to the function that they're undertaking. There was a really good sense of purpose and coordinated activity across all of these EOCs that you see. So in Kapiti, some really great initial meetings across the management team and working across their functions, and then an outstanding contribution from local iwi engaging as we build this taikihiri function to look at how do we integrate iwi hapu capacity with the official response within the CDAM sector. That's a piece of work that we're working on with NEMA nationally, and all of the CDAM groups are looking at how do we embed improvements, and we've seen them come out of the Nelson fires and the response in the Hawke's Bay. There's still a lot of work to go on in that space, but some really encouraging progress up in Kapiti. Moving to Pororua. So again, a really good stand up from the incident management team within that purpose-built EOC, some really good so what forecasting by the intelligence function, identifying the impact to infrastructure and how that would cascade through to a lack of access to potable water supply in the next period. The other activity that they undertook was to practice their really well-developed reconnaissance plans and get teams of volunteers and council staff out into the field. So the New Zealand response teams that we hosted the national exercise for back in October, the team out of Vic Uni deployed as part of the day, and they actually walked the pre-identified routes that they would take and then used a new geospatial tool that we have that enables them to do data capture in the field on their phone. It doesn't matter if they haven't got connectivity, they get back to somewhere where we've got a Starlink, and that uploads and we can start understanding what the impact is across our communities, and it ties together locally to regionally. Moving on, in Wellington City, really demonstrating the value operating out of a much larger purpose-built emergency operations centre facility at Turnbull, a very ambitious exercise across 2 shifts and nearly 12 hours for them working in that space. And they also delivered that at the same time as being really heavily engaged with partners on the HECOI planning. So we had some last minute substitutions of key staff, and they were still able to engage in that exercise. For Hutt City, again, a purpose-built EOC, we saw some really great practice there. They brought in 4 of their really experienced controllers and emergency managers who weren't playing in the exercise, and they facilitated and mentored staff from council and really maximised the learning opportunity for them within that exercise. They also really got into one of our more complex problems, which in this scenario with landslips to State Highway 2 and State Highway 58, Hutt Valley was effectively isolated at this point. All of the national resources were focused in on the South Island, and they started to really explore that task planning around supporting 100,000 people within the Hutt Valley. Similarly, next slide for Upper Hutt. Huge investment in staff training over the last year that came through a lot of new staff coming into response leadership roles. And the thing that really made the difference for them there was they spent a lot of time in the run up to the exercise working with those function managers and upskilling them and discussing how they'd respond to a scenario like this. Over into the Wairarapa, so 2 elements here. Firstly, really demonstrating the effectiveness of that shared operational arrangement across 3 councils where they come together to run a single emergency operations centre that's looking across their part of the region. That reflects the lower staffing numbers and the need to actually come together and work effectively. So a really interoperable model, including support from GW staff. So really 4 councils there within the EOC at Masterton. And then to the side, they were one of the councils that also activated an emergency assistance centre. So the official response to impacted communities and the opportunity for council staff to practice the setup and activation of that facility and how it would report back into the EOC. Lastly, we took the opportunity in this building to exercise running the regional emergency coordination centre out of Cuba Street. So over 80 staff involved in running that ECC for a shift. That's the largest numbers we've exercised in that regional role, and really reflects what we saw in the Hawke's Bay during their response to Gabrielle. Really great opportunity to develop those staff and prove how we would work upstairs in this facility. For all of them, this was the first time all 7 coordination centres had activated since early 2020 and the initial state of emergency for COVID-19. So far and away the largest exercise that we've ran in the last 4 years. If we just move on, a key element that had been stood up between the last exercise in May and this exercise was a regional geospatial common operating picture. You may have heard one of the themes coming out of the review of the North Island severe weather event is how do we establish a COP? How do we get a common operating picture across agencies? So some really great sprint work delivered by the GIS team within GW to develop a server that essentially sits in the middle as a bucket where we can consume and share data, whether it's generated from a council or coming from an emergency service or a lifeline partner agency, and put it into a space where everybody can see it. The other element we're really pushing is leaving the GIS team to do the clever stuff, but changing how we work within our emergency operations centres. So as an example, any end user, that rectangular polygon, any end user can start interrogating the data, and we need to start pushing all of the data that we either hold before an emergency or teams might be collecting in the field into the welfare teams, into the planning teams, so they can start doing their own analysis and prediction of, we've got 100,000 people in that square, what are our plans going to be if we can't get access by road in the next 2 days to get in there. The other element, and I think the last slide there, is just a sense of the regional media briefing that was exercised as part of it, but you can see some of the partner agencies that were involved. So uniform presence from Wellington Free, New Zealand Police and Fire and Emergency New Zealand, as well as liaison officers from a range of other agencies, including medical officers of health and Lifeline utility. So a pretty substantial exercise that drew a lot of partners together. The context for this activity, if we go to the next slide, this isn't just a one-off. So every year we develop with councils and then emergency services a regional training and exercising plan. That's typically built around 2 large emergency operations centre exercises every year. So obviously this one in November, the previous one was a severe weather event back in May, slightly different there where councils activated on different days and we supported them over about a 3-week period where they all activated. It was incredibly beneficial having everybody exercise on the same day. It meant instead of them talking to an exercise control, actually when a local authority had a question for the regional one, we brought them onto a call and operations was working with operations, welfare was working with welfare across the region. Those big exercises aren't taken in isolation. So one of the key outputs for REMO is the delivery of a comprehensive training program across the region. So that takes staff from an awareness level through foundation, intermediate and advanced, and we then start developing function managers, controllers and recovery managers. So last year we trained over 3,000 staff and 120 training opportunities. So every week across the region we're delivering 2 or 3 training activities at different levels. On top of that, we regularly exercise tabletops, so discussion exercises. Last week we had a region-wide discussion exercise with emergency services and controllers around a multi-occupancy fire. So hosted by Fire and Emergency, but we coordinated and set the theme for that activity. So we're starting to turn our mind with councils to what the exercise theme and scope will be for May 2025. Part of that is the analysis of the after action review from this exercise and where people want to concentrate. And the discussion with KEG a couple of weeks ago was around taking that opportunity to exercise KEG and potentially joint committee as part of that exercise. Certainly the issues we saw in this November exercise were things like the regional state of emergency and the declaration around that, but actually starting to signal really quickly we're getting into long-term problems again against the backdrop of a national emergency, and we may not have some of those resources that we'd normally rely on coming to. So I think that's the end of the slides. I'm really happy to take questions on this exercise or how we support councils and partner agencies with our training and exercising program throughout the year.
Thank you, Simon. Any questions? Anything online? Nobody. Sees.
Thank you. I just really want to reiterate what a great opportunity this is for EOC staff to get this experience, get a chance to feel what it's like to practice the training that they are doing. Everywhere that we heard around the region is people were walking away really quite buzzed about it. Really want to appreciate everybody's support from the CE level and to the mayors that were able to participate in that as well. So, kia ora, thank you.
Yeah. Mayor Gary Cavill, any comments? I know you sat in through the exercise.
Yeah, Ron. It was really good, really positive stuff. The thing that really impressed me in our one was the communication side of it. We as mayors were sort of had pretend interviews, were kept up to date with what was happening. There was good bullet points, and you know, having gone through the Cyclone Gabrielle one, where communication was just so important because you're getting hammered by radio stations and all sorts of media. You know, and the communication side of this exercise I felt was really excellent. Couldn't have been better. So no, really big success for me.
Thanks, Gary. Any other comments from the other mayors who might have participated in the exercise? Okay. I just want to say to the team, look, it's a good report, and I was a bit disappointed. I was incapacitated, so I couldn't participate on the day, be there on the day to observe as Mayor Caffel and Mayor Connolly did. But all the feedback I've had was the exercise was good. I guess it's a hard one. If Dan, if you're part of the civil defence team and you're preparing, you're planning, you're running exercise, and we all know that on the day when things go wrong, when it's happening live and real, people ask, why didn't you think of that? Why didn't you plan? Well, that's what exercises are about. They're about testing your systems, testing your processes, testing your standard operating procedures, validating that your staff are capable, competent, know their role, and stress testing to a limited degree to see how people respond under pressure. And all of that makes you stronger come the day and more confident in handling. Keeping trained people is always a challenge. People churn as a fact of life, and that only emphasises to me the need for more exercises. So, but then you can only do what you can afford to do within the money that we, the councils, make available, and that's part of your challenge that you have to deal with. I know that. So, Dan, any closing comments?
No, just it was a real fantastic day, one of the biggest we've seen, and just really appreciate everybody's support.
Okay, so Simon, thank you. Thank you very much. Item 9, Civil Defence, Wellington Civil Defence Emergency Management Group appointments. Take it the paper's read. Anything you wish to say?
No.
Okay, so are there any questions, any observations from anybody online? Any comments, any questions? Silence is golden, so we'll move. Look, I'm not going to be reading out all of those. They're up on the... Maybe they can go up on the screen. I'll ask your leave to take both those recommendations, para 1, para 2, and all the names so listed as one motion.
Yep.
Thank you, Mayor Baker. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Mayor Caffel. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Motion's carried. Thank you very much. That's the last item. Any closing comments, Dan?
I do have one closing comment. In the back of the room, Keith Evans, who is the emergency management lead at Greater Wellington Regional Council, is retiring after about 50 years in emergency management in one form or another. More than half of those have been here in New Zealand. I have known Keith since I started in the sector in 2009 because he was on the interview panel for people that interviewed me when I applied for the role at Wellington City Council Emergency Management before there was Remo, right? So that's how long I've been around, but more importantly, how long Keith has been around. He was with MacDem as part of that. Keith has always been a big fan of the importance of working as a region. He remembers, as there are a few of us that do, he remembers how pre-Remo we had 9 councils and 10 different ways of doing emergency management in the region, which is why Remo was formed after the Christchurch earthquake. Keith, you've always been a big advocate and seen the big picture view, and I just really want to thank you for everything that you've done for the sector while you were at MacDam, while you've been here at GW. Working with you has always been fun, and you're a kind human being, and I've always really appreciated that. And yeah, I don't know if anybody else wants to say anything, but thank you.
I think we can make a note that
Keith, did you have any closing words?
Was passed with acclamation. Keith, any parting comments, pearls of wisdom you want to share with us?
Come on up. I think Keith has been to over, we've talked once and you've been to over 100 joint committee meetings over your time.
As was pointed out, I've been to about 100 joint committee meetings across the Lower North Island, not all of them in Wellington. And this has probably been one of the best joint committee meetings I've been to, because you've actually challenged things as a joint committee. When I worked for MacDem, we did the monitoring and evaluation interviews, and I think some people are here that we interviewed, and it was, I always said to the mayors, so what do you think of the joint committee? And they go, oh, it's just rubber stamping. And I go, why is it just rubber stamping? It's because things need to be challenged and discussed. And that's why I really like, the length of this meeting, which brings me to a meeting we had many years ago where the chairperson sat in the chair. I won't say who it is, but sat in the chair and said, can we get this meeting over in 10 minutes? And my heart just sank, because this is really important. Disasters are political beasts. If you don't do well as a politician during a disaster, you generally don't get re-elected. Worldwide, you look at who were good politicians during disasters and where they are and the leadership that they show. It's not about managing the disaster. We don't expect politicians to manage disasters, but to lead and manage the community, because they are part of the response as well. So I think over the many years, if I take with me that Remo and Wellington region have a lot of work to do. And as a minister, and at this point, I'd rather acknowledge Nikki Kay as well today. But Rick Barker said to me once that we are never prepared, that we are always preparing. And I think that's so true. So, but thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wasn't expecting to have a speech, but thank you for the opportunity. Thank you.
So any...
Hey, so whose city does he live in so we can use him? Thank you.
Thank you, Anita. Well, look, thank you very much, Keith, and on behalf of the committee, the Joint Committee, I would thank you for your service to the people of Wellington region, and more broadly, actually, through your long involvement. I think there's a couple of pieces that I'd emphasise. Challenging. Yeah, some of us like to be challenging. not just to be painful, but it's because our minds can't help but think of what if and so what's. And to me, it's always a so what's. I look at these three scenarios, and I think for today, they were good scenarios to ponder on. But I'm also thinking, living in the Wairarapa, of extreme fire risk. And I'm thinking of, what resources are there nationally to deal with climate change, higher temperatures, longer droughts. And we look left, east and west of us. So we look particularly to the west, and we see, massive dock estate and forestry and native bush that is a treasure to us and to iwi. But I don't see the resources to handle what potentially is coming down the pipeline. And if we can't have these conversations, and if we can't run scenario exercises, then how are we ever going to be prepared? And one of the great deductions that I take from exercises, and I think if you look at the most dangerous scenario, the 9.1, and the fact that, people are agreeing 15% of people's needs are going to be met in 15 days, the so what to me is quite clear. How are those people going to be equipped to look after themselves? Because they're going to have to. And if we can't challenge up the line, then how do we expect the government to do what they need to do, which is buy planes or a capability that can deliver masses of water onto a major fire in an instant? Or are we just going to rely on little helicopters? Good luck with that one, because we've seen the consequence of that down in South Island. What we're facing potentially has to be teased out. It has to be challenged. We have to have these exercises to understand. And that's the hard part, because when there is no emergency and we've got busy lives and local water done well and all of these other challenges and regional deals in the forefront of our mind, we tend to take these meetings in a some way blasé manner. And therein lies the danger and the real consequences, potentially losses of hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands of lives. And I think we need people to remind us of what the future looks like. And we need ourselves to prepare and plan. Of course, mayors are elected, mayors come and go. But generally speaking, people like yourself, Keith, are around for a long time. And it's people like yourself that we lean back on and we need. So that's my little tucky.
Hey, Ron, isn't your biggest problem the hill? Because there is no backup option with RTC and you're completely cut off if there's anything major. And we just ignore that.
Look, Anita, and I'm at risk of being sounding like droning on about the hill. The challenge is also to supporting Wellington Basin.
That's right.
How do we, some of us forget that we have transmission gully now, because we rarely drive it. But so we always think about supply. I'm always thinking about supply lines. How do we get to Wellington? If these buildings, these big high-rise buildings have toppled and blocked roads, blocked avenues, if you can't fly in, you're absolutely dependent on helicopters or vehicles. And the hill is one of the major obstacles. But hey, so too is Hood, important to Wellington City for.
Totally agree.
And these are the scenario exercises we have to run, and we need you guys to do that. And because that will make us think. And then out of that, we can identify the shortfalls in capability, and then we can press back into that's when the leadership needs to press back into central government. And because at the end of the day, it's going to be a national response that's going to meet those needs. We're not going to meet it from Carterton. And we'll be sitting there thinking about all you guys over here in Wellington and how can we help you? Because we will, as rural people do, get out our dozers, get out our tractors, and we'll make the farming army will do its thing. And the student army will need help and resources and equipment. And at that big level, the worst thing we can do is be sitting there afterwards saying, well, we tried to tell you so, but you didn't want to listen to it.
RTC's next. Let's
Yeah.
tackle it.
Okay. Thank you, Anita. Thank you very much. Any other questions? No. Unahia ki te uru tapunui. Kia wātia, kia māma, te nākau, te tinana, te wairua i te ara takata. Koe ara e rongo whakaria aki ki ronga kia tina, hauiai, tai iai. Kia ora koutou. Thank you all very much for attending. Go Waki. Kia ora.